Have you ever looked through a keyhole, thinking you'd just catch a harmless glimpse of what's inside? A silent hallway, a closed door, a tiny sliver of vision, just enough to satisfy your curiosity. But what if something was looking back at you? Tonight, we're diving into 4 chilling true stories, told by the very people who made the mistake of peering through a keyhole. What they saw was never meant to be seen, and once they looked, nothing was ever the same. So sit back, keep your eyes open, and whatever you do, don't look too long. Story 1, The Red Eye in Room 303. It was fall semester of 2015 when Daniel Tran, a sophomore engineering major, moved into the east wing of Holloway Hall, an old dormitory on the far edge of his university campus. Holloway was the kind of place you got assigned to if you didn't fill out your housing paperwork on time, which Daniel hadn't. The building was 3 stories tall, brick-faced, and covered in ivy. It smelled faintly of mildew and floor polish. The elevator hadn't worked in years, and the hallways hummed with fluorescent lights that flickered when it rained. Daniel was placed in room 301, a cramped double-occupancy room with an even crummier view, a concrete wall and the back of a dumpster. His roommate dropped out 2 weeks into the semester, leaving Daniel with the place to himself. That would have been great, if it weren't for the strange things he began to notice about room 303, just 2 doors down. Room 303 was supposed to be unoccupied. During move-in, the RA, Marcus, had casually mentioned that it was being left vacant due to maintenance, though he never elaborated. Daniel didn't think much of it at first, until he started hearing things at night. It began with footsteps, slow, deliberate pacing back and forth behind the door of room 303. At first, Daniel thought maybe someone was sneaking in to use the space. After all, the campus housing office wasn't exactly known for security, but the footsteps came every night between 2 and 3 a.m., always at the same measured rhythm. No voices, no light under the door, just the dull thump, thump of someone walking in perfect repetition. One night in October, Daniel finally worked up the nerve to mention it to Marcus. Room 303? Marcus had paused, the color draining slightly from his face. Dude, just ignore it. Don't go messing with that room. That only made Daniel more curious. The next night, when the pacing started again, he stepped into the hallway in his socks and pajama pants. The corridor was silent, except for the steady creak of old floorboards behind the door of room 303. He approached slowly. The brass numbers on the door were old and tarnished. The knob was scratched and cold. He bent down, eyeing the narrow keyhole just below the knob. It was a simple skeleton key slot. No modern lock, no digital keypad. Just a hollow space, perfectly aligned with whatever lay on the other side. Hesitating for a moment, Daniel lowered his head and peered through. It was dark inside. Not pitch black, but dim, like the room was filled with shadow instead of air. He could barely make out shapes. A bed, maybe a desk, and something hanging on the far wall. It looked like a torn curtain swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. Then he saw it. An eye. Just one. A single red-tinted human eye staring straight back at him from the center of the room. Daniel gasped and jerked backward, falling onto the hallway floor. He scrambled to his feet and ran back to his room, heart pounding. The rest of the night, he lay awake. The image of that glowing red eye burned into his mind. It hadn't blinked. It hadn't moved. It had just looked, deep, unbroken, and impossibly still. The next day, Daniel told Marcus what he'd seen. "You looked through the keyhole?" Marcus asked, almost whispering. "Yeah, and someone or something was staring back at me." Marcus exhaled slowly, then shook his head. "I told you to leave it alone. That room, they don't talk about it, but something happened there. Years ago, before we were even students." He lowered his voice. "Back in the 90s, a kid named Evan locked himself in room 303 and never came out. They say he started hearing voices. Neighbors complained about screaming at night. When security broke down the door, he was just gone. No sign of him. No forced exit. Just his things left behind, and a journal full of drawings of red eyes. That room's been sealed off ever since. But sometimes," Marcus glanced around nervously, "sometimes people say he never really left." Daniel wanted to laugh it off, but deep down, something about Marcus's tone told him he wasn't joking. That night, Daniel did not sleep. Every creak of the floor, every shift in the wind outside, made him flinch. By 2:15 a.m., the pacing had started again, slow, steady, right on cue. Daniel lay frozen in bed, staring at his ceiling. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. 3 nights later, Daniel went back. This time, he brought his phone and recorded a voice memo as he approached the door. He wanted proof of something: the pacing, the silence, the eye, anything. He stood before room 303, heart in his throat. The sound of footsteps had stopped the moment he entered the hallway. The door stood still and heavy. He knelt and pressed his eye to the keyhole. Black. Movement. The room was lit faintly red this time, as though a blood-colored light source glowed somewhere unseen. The furniture was all wrong. Old 1950-style bed frame, broken dresser, rotting curtains. A figure stood in the corner facing the wall. Pale skin, thin limbs, no hair. Daniel strained to see more. Suddenly, the figure turned its head, and the red eye stared back again. But this time, it wasn't across the room. It was inches from the keyhole. Daniel dropped his phone. Something scraped against the inside of the door. He scrambled back, tripping over himself and crawling away down the hallway. His breathing was ragged. He couldn't even scream. He slept in his car that night. The next morning, Daniel and Marcus went to the housing office. They demanded to see the room. The RA on duty was reluctant, but Marcus had seniority and insisted. A janitor was called. The old brass key was dug up. At 11:45 a.m., the door to room 303 was opened. The room was empty, dusty, undisturbed. No bed, no desk, no curtain. Just bare floors and a cracked ceiling. The only thing inside was Daniel's phone, sitting neatly in the center of the room. He picked it up with shaking hands. The voice recording was still running. But when he played it back, there were no footsteps, no door, no whispering. Only a faint, whispery breathing and a soft tap, 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 tap like fingernails against the inside of a door. That night, Daniel packed his things and requested a room transfer. He moved to a new dorm on the opposite side of campus. Holloway Hall faded into the background of his life, like a strange, waking dream. But every once in a while, late at night, Daniel still hears it. Thump, 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 as if someone is pacing, somewhere close. And he never looks through keyholes anymore. Story 2. Grandpa's room was never empty. When Olivia's grandfather passed away, the whole family fell into a quiet, awkward grief. He had been the anchor of the Matthews household, a stern but loving presence with a deep voice, thick glasses, and a habit of humming old war songs while knitting in his favorite chair. They buried him on a rainy Saturday morning in November. By Monday, his room was locked, just as he had requested in his will. No one's to enter it for 1 year. Olivia's father had said, holding the brass key in his fist like a sacred object, "We'll honor his wishes." Olivia was 10. She didn't fully understand what death meant. Not really. One day, Grandpa was there, sitting in his worn blue armchair in the corner of his room, smelling of tobacco and peppermint. The next, he was gone. Just a photograph on the mantel and a plate of untouched butterscotch candies in a dish by the door. They kept the door to his room closed at all times. Still, Olivia would find herself standing in front of it some nights, holding her breath. The hallway outside always seemed colder than the rest of the house, and sometimes, if she pressed her ear to the door, she swore she could hear humming. The same melody Grandpa used to hum when he was alive. She told her mother, who dismissed it gently, "Honey, that's just your imagination. It's hard to let go." But it wasn't just the humming. Olivia began to have dreams. In them, Grandpa would be sitting in his chair, his back to her, knitting as usual. He never spoke, never turned around, just kept working, the steady click of the needles forming a rhythm that followed her into wakefulness. 2 weeks after the funeral, Olivia started talking to the door. "Good night, Grandpa," she'd whisper before bed. "I miss you." Sometimes she would pause, listening. And sometimes the door would creak slightly, as if something leaned gently against it from the inside. Her parents noticed her behavior. They tried to keep her distracted with after-school clubs, TV time, even a weekend trip to the zoo. But Olivia's fascination with the locked room only grew stronger. Then came the night she claimed he answered her. "I talked to Grandpa," she told her mother at breakfast. Her mother blinked. "Sweetheart, you mean in a dream?" "No. Last night. I sat by his door and told him about my math test. He said I'll do better next time." Her mother frowned, worried. "How did he say it?" "Same way he always did. He said, 'Don't beat yourself up, kiddo. Life's too long for that.'" the exact phrase her grandfather had used dozens of times when he was alive. Her parents exchanged glances that night. Olivia was too young, they said, too sensitive. The grief was manifesting in strange ways. But deep down, her father seemed uneasy. The following weekend, while Olivia was at a sleepover, her mother decided to do something she hadn't dared in weeks: look through the keyhole. The hallway was quiet. Shadows from the window trees danced faintly on the walls. The door to Grandpa's room loomed like a memory. She knelt slowly, breath shallow, and peered inside. At first, it was hard to see anything. The curtains had been drawn months ago, and only a sliver of morning light cut through a crack in the fabric. But then, she saw it. The back of the blue armchair. And in it, a shape. A man, shoulders hunched, was sitting silently, moving his arms gently, back and forth, back and forth. She could barely hear the faint click-click of knitting needles. Her chest tightened. Her heart froze. She blinked, pulled away from the keyhole, then looked again. Still there. The same stooped figure, same motion. She stood up quickly, trembling, and walked away. She didn't tell her husband, didn't speak a word. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the possibilities and all the impossibilities. The next morning, she asked her husband to unlock the door. He resisted at first. "We made a promise." "I know, but I need to see." After a long silence, he relented. The brass key clicked in the lock. The door creaked open. The room was dark, cold, and still, empty. The blue chair sat alone in the corner, bathed in dust. A thin layer of powder covered the dresser and windowsills. The curtains hadn't been touched. The knitting needles were sitting on the floor beneath the chair, where they had fallen months ago. But one thing had changed. There, folded neatly on the arm of the chair, was a half-finished sweater. A sweater Olivia had been knitting with Grandpa before he died. One that had been buried in a bag under her bed ever since. They searched the room, trying to rationalize what they were seeing. The windows were locked. No signs of entry. No animals. No broken pipes. No loose boards. Just the sweater. Sitting in the exact place where Grandpa would have placed it. After that day, Olivia's parents no longer dismissed her claims. They didn't speak openly about it, but the hallway lights stayed on all night from then on. No one lingered by the door anymore, and Olivia stopped sleeping in her own room, preferring the couch downstairs. Spring came. The family began to talk about clearing out Grandpa's room when the year was up. But every time the subject came up, someone would fall silent. No one wanted to be the first to walk in again. Then, one warm evening in June, Olivia stood at the end of the hallway holding her sketchbook. Her mother had found her drawing Grandpa earlier that day, his face more detailed than she'd ever seen her daughter render. Wrinkles, glasses, the pattern on his favorite sweater. "Are you drawing from memory?" her mother had asked. "No," Olivia replied. "He sits in the chair while I draw." Her mother hadn't known how to respond. That night, Olivia walked up to the door one last time. She pressed her small hand to the wood and whispered, "It's okay, Grandpa. You don't have to stay." Then, for the first time, she didn't wait for an answer. That was the last night they ever heard the chair creak. When the one-year mark came, the family opened the door with quiet reverence. The chair was empty. The sweater was gone. And the room, for the first time in a long time, felt truly still. Story 3. The hotel guest who never left Jackson Rivers never believed in ghosts. Not really. He'd grown up in a tiny Arizona town where superstition passed for culture, but he left it all behind when he moved to the city. By 26, he'd landed a job as the night manager at the Rosefield Grand Hotel, an old but elegant high-rise downtown that catered mostly to business travelers and the occasional eccentric long stayer. Jackson liked the night shift. It was quiet, predictable. He'd brew a pot of bitter coffee, tidy up the lobby, and spend most of his time watching Netflix behind the front desk. The place barely saw any action past 11 p.m., except for room 507. The first time Jackson heard about room 507 was from Maggie, one of the day shift housekeepers. "You'll like it here," she said on his first week. "Just don't take requests from 507. "Why not?" he asked. She shrugged, pursing her lips. "It's just strange. The guest never leaves the room, never lets housekeeping in, doesn't answer when we knock, always keeps the do not disturb sign up. Maybe they just like their privacy." "Sure," she said, "but I've worked here 9 years, and no one checks into that room. Ever." Jackson laughed it off at the time. Hotels always had their little myths, stories that staff passed around to kill time. Still, he couldn't help but notice it on the reservation list. Room 507 was always listed as occupied. Same guest, no name, no checkout date, just status in stay. Curious, Jackson printed the housekeeping log for 507. There were no linen changes, no fresh towels, no minibar restocks, nothing for months. One night, a few weeks into the job, the front desk phone rang. Jackson checked the clock, 2:44 a.m. Front desk, how may I help you? Static. Then a click. He looked at the call log. The call had come from room 507. For a second, he just stared at the screen, heart thudding. Another click, another call. He picked up. Hello? This time he heard breathing. Slow, ragged, the kind of breathing you hear from someone in pain or rage. Is everything all right up there? He asked. The line went dead. Jackson put down the phone, suddenly aware of how quiet the lobby had become. Even the hum of the vending machine seemed to recede. He told himself it was probably a prank. Someone from one of the other rooms messing around. He waited another hour, staring up at the monitor feed. At 3:47 a.m., something strange appeared on the security footage from the 5th floor. The hallway was dimly lit, empty, until a shadow moved across the far end of the screen. Not walking, not running, just a vague, human-shaped figure gliding toward room 507. It stopped right in front of the door, stood still, and then it turned, slowly, as if looking directly into the hallway camera. Jackson leaned closer. The figure didn't have a face. He blinked. The screen glitched, and the hallway was empty again. The next morning, Jackson brought it up with his supervisor, an older man named Luis who'd worked there since the 80s. Luis shook his head slowly. You saw it too, huh? You know something's wrong with that room. I know better than to mess with it, Luis muttered. We had a bellhop quit last year after hearing tapping from inside when he walked past. Said he looked through the keyhole and saw someone facing the wall, motionless, dressed like a guest from the 1970s. What's in there? Luis leaned in. Back in '92, a man named Philip Darrow checked into room 507. Corporate lawyer, stayed 2 nights. On the 3rd night, guests on the floor started complaining of a smell. Management went up, found Darrow hanging from the bathroom light fixture. Jackson swallowed. Luis continued, except here's the thing, they never removed the body. That's the part no one tells. They couldn't. The coroner said the body was there, sure, but then it wasn't. Vanished from the room after it was documented. But every few months, someone swears they see him. Jackson laughed nervously. That's a story, a ghost story. Luis didn't laugh. And it's not the only one. You stay long enough, you'll see. 3 nights later, Jackson was closing out the register when the call came again. 2:11 a.m., room 507. He almost didn't answer, but something pulled at him, some part of his brain that had started to believe despite everything. He picked up. This time, a voice spoke. Why can't I leave? The voice was low, gravelly, like someone whose vocal cords had been used too much or not at all for decades. Jackson froze. Who is this? Silence. Then again, softer. Why? Can't I leave? Jackson hung up. He stared at the elevator for a long minute, then grabbed his keyring and took the stairs to the 5th floor. The hallway was cold. Not air-conditioned cold, wrong cold. Like the chill that comes from under a basement door you don't remember having. He walked slowly to 507. The Do Not Disturb sign hung as always. The door looked normal, but the hallway light above it flickered violently, casting the number 507 in and out of existence. He knocked. No answer. He leaned in, listening. Nothing. Then, impulsively, he crouched and looked through the keyhole. The room was dim, lit by a faint greenish hue, as if an old lamp was left on far in the corner. A man stood facing the wall, completely still, wearing a brown suit, hands clenched at his sides. Jackson squinted. The man's head twitched, just once, as though he knew he was being watched. Jackson jumped back. His blood was rushing, ears ringing. He turned and sprinted back down the hall. The next morning, room 507 was no longer listed as occupied in the system. It had been removed. Not checked out, erased. The record gone. Jackson asked Luis. Luis shrugged. What room? You know what room. I told you, Luis said. He never left. That room belongs to him now. 2 weeks later, Jackson quit. But before he left, he took one last look at the 5th floor camera feed. Room 507's door was open. A man stood in the doorway. brown suit, facing the wall, and slowly he turned toward the camera. Story 4, Don't Look into Cabin 12. It started with a road trip. 4 college friends, Nina, Ryan, Derek, and Lily, decided to spend a long weekend off-grid, far from the stress of finals and buzzing phones. Derek's uncle owned a small, half-forgotten cabin resort up in the mountains, about 3 hours from campus. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just pine trees, campfires, and silence. Perfect. They arrived just before sunset on a Thursday evening. The resort was quiet, dusty, and overgrown in places. 6 cabins lined a gravel path that looped into the woods. Most looked abandoned, except for one, the main office, where an elderly woman named Mrs. Abner handed over their key with trembling fingers. "You'll be in cabin 4, she said, her voice brittle. "Cleanest one we've got." "Thanks," Nina smiled. "Place looks great, charming." Mrs. Abner didn't smile back. Instead, she leaned in slightly and added, "Don't go near cabin 12. They all exchanged glances. Ryan tried to lighten the mood. "There are 12 cabins? We only saw 6. "Cabin 12 isn't on the path," she said quietly. "It's deeper in the woods. You'll see the trailhead behind cabin 6. But don't follow it. And if you do see the cabin, don't touch the door. Don't look through the keyhole. Don't even get close." "Why?" Derek asked, half laughing. "Is it haunted?" Mrs. Abner met his eyes. Her expression didn't change. She waits for people to look. They left the office in a strange silence. Cabin 4 was cozy enough, even if the floorboards groaned and the furniture smelled like old cedar. They built a fire outside, roasted marshmallows, and played music from Ryan's Bluetooth speaker until the stars blanketed the sky. By midnight, the weird warning had faded into a joke. Cabin 12 became a recurring punchline. "We should go looking for it tomorrow," Ryan said. "Bring a Ouija board." Derek laughed. But Nina didn't laugh. She kept glancing toward the tree line beyond cabin 6. The next morning, Ryan and Derek were up early. The girls stayed behind to make breakfast. By the time the guys returned, muddy and flushed from the hike, they were carrying something. "We found it," Derek said, eyes wide with excitement. "The cabin?" Ryan nodded. "Cabin 12. It's real." Nina stared at him. "You went looking? After what she said?" "It's just an old shack," Ryan shrugged. "Looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Door was boarded shut, but it was there. Cabin number carved into the beam and everything." 12? "You didn't go inside, right?" Lily asked, nervous. "Couldn't," Derek said. "It was locked up tight, but there was a keyhole, like one of those old antique ones. I looked." Nina froze. "You what?" "I looked through it," he repeated. "But it was pitch black. I didn't see anything." Nina stood abruptly. "That was stupid." "It's just a story," Ryan muttered. That night, the woods seemed quieter than usual. No crickets, no wind, just the slow, soft creaking of trees in the distance. At around 2 a.m., Derek sat up in bed, sweating. He swore he heard something whispering outside the window, but when he looked, there was nothing there. In the morning, his eyes were bloodshot. "Didn't sleep?" Lily asked. He shook his head. "Bad dreams." By afternoon, he was pale and quiet. He didn't eat, barely spoke. That evening, he went to lie down early while the others sat by the fire. When Nina went to check on him around midnight, his bed was empty. She ran outside. Derek's gone. They found him 20 minutes later, barefoot, standing in the trees behind cabin 6, staring toward the woods. "Derek?" Ryan called. He didn't respond. When they reached him, his lips were moving, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead. Nina grabbed his shoulder, and he flinched violently. "Don't look into it," he mumbled. They walked him back to the cabin, trembling. He wouldn't say another word. The next morning, he was gone again. This time, they followed the faint path into the forest. It wasn't long before they saw it. Cabin 12 stood alone in a shallow clearing, half swallowed by vines. Its roof sagged. The windows were boarded over, and the wooden door was dark with rot. But the number was still there, carved in deep, ragged strokes, 12, and Derek was standing in front of it, staring at the keyhole. "Don't," Nina started, but it was too late. He leaned forward, stared through. A long silence. Then he screamed. A scream so sudden, so raw, it made the birds in the trees scatter. He fell back, clawing at his face. Nina rushed to him, but he was already shaking, eyes shut, hands over his ears. "She's in there," he sobbed. "She's in there. She looked at me." They carried him back to cabin 4. By sundown, he wasn't speaking. Just sitting in the corner, rocking slowly. His eyes were glassy. Sometimes they darted toward the door, sometimes the keyhole in their own cabin. Nina made the decision. We're leaving. First light. Ryan didn't argue. That night, she sat awake, watching Derek breathe. She heard the wind, the crack of trees, the soft tapping of branches against the walls. And then something else. A creak from the front door. She turned her head slowly. The Do Not Disturb sign was swinging gently, though no one had touched it. Then she saw it, a single pale eye staring through the keyhole from the outside. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The eye blinked once, then vanished. The next morning, Derek was gone for good. They searched until dusk, but no sign. At sunset, they returned to the office. Mrs. Abner didn't act surprised. He looked, she said flatly. They always do. Who is she? Nina asked. The old woman looked past her, eyes glassy. She was once like you, a guest, a girl who stayed too long and saw too much. Now she waits. Cabin 12 doesn't want to be empty. What happens to the ones who look? They stay. Nina left that night with Lily and Ryan. They never found Derek's body. His name was added to a growing list of missing persons in the area, but no one ever connected it to the cabin. 3 months later, Ryan hanged himself in his apartment. The note he left behind simply said, "She's still watching me." Nina never slept through the night again. Sometimes when she turned out the lights, she would feel it, that presence just outside the door. Listening, waiting, watching through any crack it could find. She moved twice, changed her number, burned her old hiking gear. But deep in the woods, Cabin 12 is still there, still waiting, and she never did go near a keyhole again. Some doors are closed for a reason. Some keyholes were never meant to be looked through. Curiosity might offer a glimpse, but at what cost? What stares back from the darkness may not be human, may not be bound by wood or walls. If you ever feel the urge to peek through a keyhole, ask yourself, what if something is looking back? And worse, what if it decides to follow you home?